Welcome to the Event Connection, where we explore the stories, trends, and unforgettable moments that are shaping our industry. We'll uncover the human side of events and celebrate the power of engagement and connection, all while having a little fun. This podcast is produced by PC Nametag.
Welcome back to the Event Connection. I am super excited to talk about event networking today, and we're going to talk about how to gamify your next networking event. And I have a great guest who I met on LinkedIn recently. His name is Melvin, and he is the founder of JamSocial. Welcome, Melvin.
Well, thank you, Meaghan, for having me.
I love Melvin's posts that he has on social. He had this one post that I saw. It was like diabolical one-liners for your event, and it just made me laugh. I was like, we've got to be friends once I connected with him. And we've done some content swaps recently, and it's been just a lot of fun. So if you're looking to learn a little bit more about how to make your networking event a lot more fun, I would definitely recommend checking out Melvin's LinkedIn. So I want to hear a little bit more about how you got into the events industry, since we're both so passionate about networking and making it fun and, making the experience a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, that's a great question. How I got into the events industry was completely by chance. It started off as like a thing of hosting events at university. So maybe we would do like small get-togethers. And it wasn't until I went on an exchange program in the Netherlands where I was walking the streets and I saw this random sign on the lamppost, and the sign was something like meet 5 people for lunch or something like that, like meet up with people. And I was like, this is such a cool idea. Like, I wonder if people back in Canada, where I'm from, would like something like this, because I've never seen it happen before in Canada. And then I came back to Canada and I was like, you know what, let's just host an event for people to meet each other. And that's really where it all started, because one event was really successful. It had like 70 plus people who showed up. And then people kept on asking, when's the next one? When's the next one? And I slowly started doing more and more and more events in my hometown here in Calgary. And that's really how we got started. And ever since, I didn't look back. And it's been fabulous, because connecting with people makes it really fun.
I love that you saw that idea and you rolled with it, and it really ignited something within your community. People really want to get together. They're craving that genuine connection. And I'm hearing that a lot from the event planners that we chat with. People have, been doing these online experiences, or maybe they have been doing in-person experiences, but they haven't gotten that connection out of it that they're looking for. So that's why I'm super excited to talk to you about, JamSocial and Jam Bingo, which we'll get into later in the episode. But I also wanted to touch on introverted networking, because I don't know about you, but I identify on like a introvert to extrovert spectrum. I'm kind of like in the middle, maybe leaning more towards introvert. I don't know about you, but I know we both have this passion about introvert networking and helping introverts, get the most out of their experience and have a fun time and feel comfortable there. So let me know a little bit more about why you're so passionate about introvert networking.
Well, introvert networking is something that I stumbled to by accident, because by hosting these events in Calgary, I started to meet a lot of people who were challenging themselves to come out to events as a way to meet new people. But what really got me passionate about it was that back in university, I would always notice like you have the different groups of people who are super social, people who are a little bit nerdy. And I was in the group of people who were nerdy because that was my field. I was doing computer science. And because I hung around people who were super nerdy, whenever we would have a chance to go to a social event, I would feel like I was the middleman connecting the nerdy people to the extroverted people, because I felt like I could go in between an introvert and an extrovert. But something got me really passionate, because when I would host my own events and I would see introverts come through, I felt something that was drawing me to, okay, how do we connect these people together? Because I understand what it's like. I understand what it means to be on the introverted side, but I also understand what it means to make new connections and meet extroverts in the room. But my passion came from just being in the social circles of people who were naturally reserved and naturally introverted, and in a way, that kind of forced me to be the middleman. And being the middleman, you start to learn some tips and tricks like, hey, how do I introduce two people together? Perhaps maybe if I know these people have two things in common, I could say, hey, by the way, did you know Megan's also interested in this? And it opens up that door. So that's really how I got my passion for it, was just being friends with people who were introverted. And from those social circles, applying that same principle of like, how do you connect introverts and extroverts, and applying that into professional networking style events.
I love that. I'm super passionate about introverts as well, because I think there's kind of this stigma about being an introvert. It's like, extroverts, have more, social confidence, and we kind of like assume that introverts don't have that same social confidence. I think we just need to approach it in a different way and help introverts feel prepared and ready for the social experience. So I know we're going to talk a lot about how to create that for introverts today, but I wanted to start with why you and I love networking experiences. I know for me, I think it's a great opportunity for anyone, especially introverts, to work on their listening skills and work on those interpersonal skills. I love the ability to chat with people and kind of figure out my own personal brand. Like if I'm talking with someone and they're really vibing with something that I'm talking about, that will inspire me. Like, hey, that would make a great LinkedIn post, or that would create a great video that I could put out on the internet. And I just love being in a room of people that are super passionate about the same thing as me. How about you?
100%. And perhaps you can also agree, like it also gives you an opportunity to show different sides of yourself and see what lands well. Like, I mean, you talked about like, how do you position yourself and how do you introduce yourself at these events? I think that's something I really love about networking events, is that it gives you an opportunity to practice approaching people you don't know and like pitch yourself in different ways and see what sticks. Mm-hmm. Like, I'll be curious to hear stories about how you got into and how you started discovering your voice at these sort of networking events, because that is something that could often be a challenge, is like, how do you properly introduce yourself, or how do you, like, what type of image are you trying to portray at these events? And that could be make or break for most people, because if you don't have practice doing that, you might go up to an event and you might be completely like overwhelmed by, okay, like, what do I say? How do I say it? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, like, what have been some experiences for you where you've been like, how do I pitch myself? How do I show up at these networking events?
Mm-hmm. What you were just talking about, that kind of reminded me, I think, like introducing yourself and knowing how to talk to strangers is almost a bit of a lost art. I think before COVID, people felt a lot more confident with it. And then, with this expanse of time that we weren't really doing those interpersonal events and connections, I think sometimes it's a little bit difficult. And then we have Gen Z. I've heard over and over, they're not super interested in just being thrown into a group of 50 people in a room and just being left to it. They like a little bit more guidance. They want to have an activity. They want to, have a game that they can play. So I think that's something that we really need to work on. And I think as event planners, we can kind of facilitate those connections. So I love that. And then to go back to the question that you asked me, I just love, kind of figuring out who am I at my events and who do I want to portray myself as. Like this one time I was sitting with this lady and we were kind of talking about, what we specialize in the events industry. And she focuses on the CMP, which is the Certified Meeting Professional designation. And then I do content in the events industry. So we were like, hey, I don't know too much about the CMP. And she wanted to learn some LinkedIn tricks. And these are two things that neither of us know too much about. So we thought, hey, we should do a content collaboration. So I just love, you never know who you're going to meet at events, and just be yourself and have fun with it.
100%. And I like that part about being yourself, because I think when you are yourself, it allows you to connect with people who actually get to know you and actually get to relate with you a lot more. Because something that I have noticed, especially at networking events, is that sometimes we try to show up in a way that's not really who we are. And I think that makes it a lot harder to connect with new people. Like, for example, I remember I went to it was my first ever conference of this nature. It was like it was a week-long type event. And then they had like a launch party. And I remember at this launch party, it was huge. There were probably like hundreds of people in this room. And I was like, well, how do you even network in a situation like this? Like, it's just so big. And then my first thought was like, okay, how do I stand out in a room full of people introducing themselves? So I came up with this idea, and it was like, what if I just introduce myself as Bill Gates? Because if I introduce myself as Bill Gates, people would, if it's the right person, it would land and they would laugh about it. But it would immediately let me know, like, okay, who here has the same sense of humor? And it turns out I did it for about 5 different people. And one of those 5 people that I did it with, he's one of my close friends even till today. And that was like 6, maybe 7 years ago that I did this challenge. And it just happened because he was like, no way, this guy introduced himself as Bill Gates. And we kept in touch ever since. But that's something I really love about networking events, is that it gave me an opportunity to go try new things, to like see what sticks. And over time, when you have enough things that stick, it gives you like a blueprint of how you can go on with introducing yourself at future events as well.
I love that, because then people probably start visually identifying you, like, oh, hey, that guy was super funny. You've got to meet Melvin. And so, now you're all of a sudden meeting a whole bunch of new people in the room.
100%.
And that also brings me back to Melvin and I were having this conversation of how you can kind of stick out at events. And we had this shared interest in, wearing a fun outfit or wearing a statement piece or fun jewelry or fun socks, because then it's like a way to visually help you stand out in the room. So I love that humor is that for you.
100%. 100%.
I want to dive into some of the things that maybe we don't love as much about networking. And I think this is a good conversation because event planners want to know about this. They want to know, how can we make everyone feel more confident there and have, a great experience and get the most out of the time at the event. So I can start. Some of the things that I maybe am not as much in love with as far as networking events is, I know sometimes I'm going to out myself a little bit, but as an introvert, if you have, an hour of networking before the program starts, I'm probably not going to show up right when the hour starts, because it's like, then you got to figure out small talk with people. And it's just like, if you don't have, conversation starters, sometimes it's hard to know what to talk about with people. Or I've had this conversation with Melvin before. If you go to a networking event and everyone's already in their pods and you don't know anybody there and you don't know how to break into the huddles of people that are already in there, it's just very difficult for introverts to do. So that's just one thing that I would like to see maybe change in the future. Or if you don't know anybody there and you go to lunch, where do I sit at the lunch? Who am I chatting with? So I think there's some room for improvement with those things. What do you think?
I agree. I think the worst one is when you go to an event and people already know each other and they're already huddled up. Those are always the toughest ones, because you probably want to go network, but everybody else is comfortable being with their bubble. Mm-hmm. That's one thing I really disliked, especially when I got into it. But the other thing too, like I found really weird about networking events, was when people would come up to you and they would hit you with the sales pitch right away. Ooh. Like I remember, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, but you always have those people, they come up to you, they're like, hi, my name is so-and-so. By the way, here's my business card. This is what we do. And I'm just like, okay, like
we want
this goes in my back pocket. Mm-hmm, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it becomes really hard because you go to a lot of networking events to make new connections, but those opportunities to connect, frankly, sometimes feel transactional, or maybe sometimes you feel it feels gated because you're not a part of the circle. So those were some things that I disliked about networking events. And just like you, I've definitely been at a few events a little bit later, because sometimes you're like, okay, maybe I'll go in when things are moving a bit, because I don't want to have to start any conversations with small talk. So those are some things I dislike. But yeah, there's a whole list of them. But I think for me, the worst one is always a sales pitch at the start. Mm-hmm. And for sure, the ones where you have huddles of people and you're like, how do I get into this group? And then maybe you do get into the group and then everybody kind of looks at you, but they give you like the friendly smile, and then they go back to talking,
Like,
and now you feel like you're obligated to stand there and listen, but then it creates a whole awkward situation. So those are always the worst ones.
That's when
for
you
sure.
got to say, oh, I'm going to grab some more food, or I'm going to grab another drink. So I would definitely agree with you on that. It's like, if you don't know who's in the room, it's like your time is valuable too. So if you pop into a group and you're not vibing with that specific huddle, it's like, how do we, meet some more people? So I would definitely agree with you on that. And I would also agree that, when you get those LinkedIn requests and it's someone who's immediately going into the, who we are, what we sell kind of thing, it's just not the most ideal connection. So I would definitely agree with you on that. I think that's a good segue into our next question. So I want to talk about how introverts network and how extroverts network, and how their styles kind of differ. So in your opinion, how do you feel that networking for introverts and extroverts is a little bit different?
From my experience, especially working with different style of events and meeting different types of people, something I've really heard, especially from introverts, and also something I felt myself, is when it comes to networking, I feel like introverts like it more when it's more personal, like maybe one-on-one, maybe small groups of like 5. And extroverts really like it when it's bigger groups of people, because it gives them an opportunity to really mingle. But I think the real value comes from understanding like who you are and like what your preferences are. Like I remember when I first started hosting events, there were people who would message me and say, hey, I really like the concept behind this event, but I'm curious if you have one for like smaller groups of people to just connect. And those were definitely more of the introverted folks, because I think there are varying degrees to being an introvert. And for some introverts, it's actually even daunting to step in a room of like 20, 30, 50 people.
Definitely.
And they much rather prefer like smaller groups. But then there are other introverts, which I would identify more closely with, who are okay being by themselves, but they're also okay socializing. So they go, I heard someone call it like you're transforming. Maybe you can be introverted sometimes, being extroverted other times. And I think that is the group that I would associate with, because I'm okay doing small groups, but I'm also okay doing larger groups. And I think that's one key difference between introverts and extroverts, is like the comfortability when it comes to group sizes, and also how personal people get. Perhaps maybe introverts really like it when things are a little bit more deeper connection.
Yeah.
When things facilitate that deeper connection, rather than just like, okay, like, hey, this is a nice event, very cool. But maybe they like to get to know people a little bit more. So I definitely identify with that as well. Not to say extroverts don't, but
Right.
the degree to which they prefer those type of settings, I think looks different for both sides. But what do you think? Do you feel like you're more introverted or you're more introverted at some times, but then extroverted at other times? Or do you feel like you're more introverted all the time? Like, what does that look like for you?
There's a word for that. If some of you aren't familiar, it's called an ambivert. So if you're kind of like in the middle, sometimes you kind of like flex on the spectrum. It's called an ambivert. So I just learned that recently. So but I would go back to what you were just saying. I thought it was really interesting that you were kind of talking about how there can be like different levels of activities that are kind of catered towards introverts, because maybe some introverts thrive in a room of 20 people, and maybe some thrive with a group of 5 people at a lunch table. So that's very interesting. It's something for event planners specifically to think about. And going back to the question that we were kind of talking about, how introverts and extroverts are different, I was kind of thinking, for me, it's 2 things. One, it's like how you prepare for an event. Like introverts, they really want to be prepared. They want to know, like what to wear, when to arrive, where do I park? They want to, know who they're talking to in the room. Whereas extroverts, they just want to show up and have a good time. And then another thing that I really hear from event planners is, extroverts, they refuel their energy by talking with people and being in a big room and doing high energy activities. Whereas sometimes introverts, they need to take a step back. They need to take a pause, maybe go to a quiet room at the conference and take a few deep breaths. So it's how we kind of refuel. And That brings me to this one thing that I learned from this lady named Liz Green. She's great. She has this concept called, are you a border collie or an iguana? Which it sounds so funny, but it's kind of like a spectrum. So like border collies, this is like your personality type. Border collies, they love, like high energy activities. They want to go, they want to meet as many people as possible. Whereas iguanas, they more refuel with, like introspective activities like reading or meditation or yoga. So you might not be on one end of the spectrum or not, but I just love that idea. If you want to learn more about yourself, maybe you can figure out where you might be on that spectrum. I don't know, where do you think that you would be on there, Melvin?
Well, I like the illustration. I think is it paints a really interesting pit photo. It depends. It depends on the situation, because there are situations where I do feel like, okay, I have to be extroverted here in this situation, because if I'm not going to be able to get the value from this event. So I like the word you said, an ambivert, where you can go between. And I think I can go between depending on the situation. But I would definitely be more comfortable on the introverted side of things, like in terms of like a default setting. So perhaps maybe that would be my default setting, would be on the spectrum of like, okay, I prefer the smaller group, prefer just to chill. But if I had to, okay, then I would go all the way to the extreme. Not extreme, but go all the way to the extroverted side.
I love that. And like you said, you can flex, depending on the situation, which it's good to have that self-awareness. So let's say that a planner puts together an event and it's a little bit more geared towards extroverts with the programming or the activities. Do you feel like there's something that might get in the way of you getting the most out of the experience if you are an introvert? I know for me, there can be some discomfort with like the unfamiliar. Like I said, like what should I wear? How do I get to the building? So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. It's like if you have introverted attendees, sometimes it's nice to have those know before you go things on the website, or you can do some social posts or do a video just like this. I think introverts like to feel prepared. So for example, this past weekend, there was a silent book club in my town. And if you aren't familiar with what a silent book club is, it's basically everyone's reading their own book. And then you read for a little bit, and then you discuss your own book with the group. So it's super cool. And I love the idea of it. And I hadn't been to one, but I was almost not even going to go because I was like, I'm not going to know anybody there, or, like, who do I talk with? But I ended up going anyways, and it was a lot of fun. So I think that's just a good example of, you might have people who might be too even afraid to come to your event because they're unfamiliar with what the experience is like.
100%. And I think you covered that really well. And something I'll add on to that is when I've met introverts, like I'm talking like really, really introverted, like they challenge themselves to go out to events once a month or once every quarter. And one thing that I got to learn from talking with several different people is that having a buddy really helps. Especially having a buddy who's a bit more extroverted than you helps when it comes to going out to these events. So yes, being prepared, but having someone who you can be like, okay, I'm here with someone. If things get a little bit too chaotic or they get a little bit overwhelming, I could come back. I have that safety net. That's something that really helps. But I also feel like something that really helps as well, especially with getting the most out of a networking event as an introvert, is putting yourself out there and actually going. Like you said, like you saw this event and you're like, hey, I want to go try it out. And that is honestly the first step, because you give yourself the opportunity to meet new people, and you give yourself the opportunity to actually grow and develop. Because I think depending on how introverted you are, there's a bit of practice that you need in terms of talking with people, in terms of going to an event, because that practice allows you to gain the confidence to approach more events and approach maybe varying difficulties of like networking at different events. Like, for example, I remember I was hosting this one event and I saw this guy. This event we did it at a furniture shop, actually.
Ooh,
I remember
cool.
it was kind of a cool concept, because I was like, let's do an event at a furniture shop, but it's young professionals to come network. And I was like, let's see who shows up for something like this. So we did it, and we had a really good turnout of young professionals. And I remember we had this one guy who came through, and he was sweating. Like, I actually thought when I saw him, I thought he had ran to the venue. So I asked
Oh
him,
my
like, "Are you
gosh.
okay? Like, do you need a bottle of water?" And then he told me, and he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm okay. I've been talking to people." And then I was like,
Oh, that's it?
like,
Wow.
are you like, I was, I was like, okay. But then he told me that this is he challenges himself to come out to these events because he wants to get better at talking to people. And visibly looking at him, I could tell like this is something that maybe he's learning to overcome. But man, like when I saw that, I was like, man, this is so good for you, because even being at this event is more than enough of a challenge, yet alone talking to people. So the fact that he was challenging himself and showing up, that was something that I was like, wow, this is really inspiring. And of course, people are different. Not everyone's going to be sweating at every event profusely, but we all have our different challenges, right? So we all try to do our best to
I
take
think
the right
that goes
steps.
for any attendee. If you're kind of nervous to go to something, whether you're introverted or extroverted, because you don't know anybody or you're not sure if you'll get the most out of it, what's the worst that could happen? You go, you decide it's not for me, then you don't go again. But like I said, in my case of me going to the silent book club this weekend, I had such a great time. And it turns out I knew 2 people there and I didn't even plan it. So I felt completely comfortable there anyways. But you miss all the shots that you don't take. So challenge yourself to just give it a shot, go and make the most of it. And you can act confident even if you don't feel confident inside. If you just fake it till you make it, that works most of the time for me anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I also love the idea of bringing a buddy. I think that's a really great way to get started, because then you can introduce one another, or maybe this person knows some people, but you don't. Have them bring you over to that group of people and have them introduce you. So I think it's a good way that you can lean on other people so that you can feel more comfortable.
100%. And something that's also really interesting too is, I know for me going to events, especially bigger conferences, one of the things that I really struggle with was like, how do you approach people and how do you really start the conversation? And something that I did that flipped the script a little bit is I went to this one conference and I wore a t-shirt, and the t-shirt had a QR code on the back and it said "No friends?" and it had a QR code.
I love that.
So my thought process was like, okay, like I'm at this big conference and I know it can be really tough to go up and meet different people. What if I flip it so people come meet me? And I wore this QR code and I walked around, and that really changed a lot, because there were people who would see it and they'd be like, "I want to scan your back." And then they would be like trying to scan my back. And then it would open up this whole conversation about what is this guy doing here wearing this t-shirt? Like, what is he all about? And that's something that was interesting, because it flipped the script from like, how do I go talk to people, to how do I stand out in a way that people come talk to me? And I know this is something you also wrote about, which is like, how do you dress in a way that's unique? Because when you dress in a way that's unique, it naturally draws people to you, because maybe you're wearing like a cool hat, or maybe you have like a name tag or like a badge. It's like, oh, this person stands out a bit. I would like to go talk to them. And that's something that could really change a lot and could really make the difference between like going to a networking event and talking to people, or going to an event and hoping you can have a conversation. So that is something I wanted to mention, because it's helped out a lot.
I feel like that would be a fun giveaway. Like if you could pre-print shirts for people that they could wear with QR codes on it, you could have it go to anywhere. I'll put that in my mind. I feel like that's a fun way to, add some more whimsy to your event experience. I would love to ask you
100%.
a little bit more about how to like gamify your event and make it a little bit more fun. And I would love to hear more about JamSocial and Jam Bingo in a moment, but I thought we could talk about some of our favorite ways that we have seen people gamify events and add some more fun and interactive activities to it. So I can go ahead and get started. At PC Name Tag, we see a lot of really cool event badge designs that event planners send in for their conferences. And we didn't specifically do this specific badge, but TEDx, several years ago, they did these really cool badge designs where they had 3 different badges, and when you put them together, it made a picture. So that's like a great way to like go up to people and be like, hey, you know, like let's put our badges together and, you know, make that picture, and let's take a picture and put it on social. So I loved, you know, the thought of taking your event badge design to like a new level and make it like more of like a way to interact with people. So I thought that was like a fun thing that, you know, pretty much anybody could do. Another thing that I've seen done recently is in your event registration form, you ask someone, what's your passion? So I might say, my passion is reading. And then you can have that printed right on the badge so that when you're at the event, you can just look specifically at someone's badge and say, oh, you're interested in hiking. Where are some of your favorite places that you've been hiking? Or you love traveling? Where's the most recent place that you've traveled? So I think those are really easy wins of how to add a little bit more interactivity to networking events. And I would love to hear a little bit more about Jam Bingo. I know that's kind of like your bread and butter at JamSocial. And I haven't been to an event that's had this yet, but I would love to play Jam Bingo. It looks so much fun. So tell us a little bit more about that.
This is what we do best, is gamifying networking at events. And before I even talk about Jam Bingo, something that came to mind as you were talking about the name tag was, I believe we've heard of like the party games. Sometimes you go to a party game and they have like different cup colors, and then you have to pick a different cup color depending on who you're trying to meet at the event. But they did something similar at a conference that I was at, but it was with name tags. So they actually had different color stickers, and you could put a different color sticker on your badge, and it would let people know who you were attending as. So then if you saw someone was like a red sticker, you can be like, oh, this person's attending as as an investor, or maybe this person's attending as a founder. So we made it a little bit easy because, hey, let me see your color. And then I see your color. Oh, tell me about what you're working on. So that is something that really helps. For sure. And Jam Bingo is something that we created because of me hosting my own events. So I used to host my own events because I was like, hey, like, how do you meet people? And while I would host these events, we would have introverts actually come through. And the introverts would be at the events, and they would kind of retreat into the corners of the venue. Maybe they'd be pulling out their phone. And I was like, well, how do we make sure like people who come to the events can actually network? Because they've done the hard work of coming, but what do you do when you're actually there? Like, how do you facilitate networking? And that's where the concept behind Jam Bingo came, because it gives people an excuse to connect, because it gives them conversation questions or challenges that'll force them to go around the room and meet new people. And the first time we did it at one of our events, it was a huge success, because the kind of conversation questions we had was a mix of deep questions. So for the introverted folks who are more interested in like getting to know people, we had deep questions, but we also had fun conversation questions. So I'll give you some examples. Like, we had deep questions like, find someone in the room and ask them what success means to them. That's a very interesting question to ask somebody the first time you meet them. But that was one of the questions we had. And then we also had fun questions like, find someone who is wearing the same shoe color as you, or maybe find someone wearing the same shoe size. These are things that you would never do ordinarily at an event. Like, hey, we have the same shoe color, so I came up to talk to you. But because we put it in a game format and we gave people permission to play, we actually saw people connecting over things that they otherwise wouldn't. And that really made the huge difference, because the introverted folks loved it because it gave them an excuse to go talk to people. And the extroverted folks, I mean, they love talking to people, but now it gave them conversation starters that they could talk about, as opposed to the usual, what do you do? Or like, what brought you to the event? But it gave them fun things to ask.
I love that. And I like the open-endedness to it. It's like, oh, hey, you know, that sparked something in me. I want to learn more about that. Tell me more about that. So I like that you're kind of going from surface level to asking more fun questions, but also I feel like those fun questions lead to deeper connections with people. It's like, hey, this is someone I really want to stay connected with on LinkedIn after this event. So I like that it's taking kind of like the element of bingo and making it a little bit deeper, because I know attendees again and again, they're saying we want genuine connections with people. We want to learn more about, you know, the people who are in the room. and, have those great connections. So I love that. I also wanted to ask you about, so you kind of take this technological take on bingo for events. And I want to learn more about how, if you have technology at an event, sometimes there might be a stigma or a misconception that having tech as part of a socializing experience might make it less personal. Is that your experience, or what would you say?
It's quite interesting because when we first started out, technology was something that we had to tweak and change very early on. But something that we really got to hear from organizers, which I was quite surprised to hear, was some organizers were a little bit hesitant about involving tech because they were always like, we don't want people on their phones. We want people to be able to socialize. And that was quite interesting to hear. But the approach we took was, how do we take the very device that most people are used to, retreating and disconnecting from everyone who is physically there, and how do we take that and actually make it a tool to facilitate in-person connections? And we did that really well with Jam Bingo. So once we could show them how it worked, it became clear that, okay, this is something that's actually going to get people talking. And when I went to events, that is exactly what happened. In fact, the first time that we really got to attend an event as a team in our home city, what we started to see was that people would start playing the game, but as they got comfortable approaching different people, they would put their phone away, and then they would actually start talking to people just naturally.
Nice.
And
that's
that
what
was
we
when
want.
we knew
Yes.
this is 100%. And that's when we knew we were onto something, because it broke the initial ice. But as soon as the ice was broken, people didn't feel the need to hold on to it anymore, and they put it away. And that's when we knew we won, because it was like, okay, like people are actively choosing to put it away because they want to have that real interaction, as opposed to retreating and saying, okay, let me check the weather.
Right? Like,
let me
what do I
check
do
who I'm
now?
connected on LinkedIn. Exactly. So that is something that we actually got to see, and it's been amazing, like using technology to get people off their phones, which is quite ironic, but it's the way we've chosen to do it, and it's the way that we help people interact, which has
That's
been very
interesting,
cool to
because
see.
in my opinion, people are going to be on their phones anyways, and if they're not feeling like they're vibing with the people in the room, they're probably going to go on their phones. So I guess I love the idea of just taking advantage of people using their cell phones anyways, and have it be a part of your event, make it a part of the gamification and the interactivity. So I love that Jam Bingo brings that to events.
100%. And Meaghan, something that's quite interesting, I know that you're very much in this whole event space, and you work a lot with different organizers. But I'm curious, as someone who works and talks with event organizers, and also as someone who actually goes to these events, whether you go to networking events or maybe you go to silent reading clubs, what is one thing that you wish you knew, that you now know, when you first got into the whole event industry, when you got into networking?
I love that question. I started at PC Name Tag in 2020, and I didn't know too much about event planning, conference planning. I think one of the biggest things that I learned off the bat is event planning takes real skill. I think people think, oh, I've planned a wedding before, or I've planned a baby shower. I think event planning is a lot more nuanced than that. It takes a lot of skill and a lot of preparation, the right person to really excel at it. Like, there's even event planning degrees now. I know here in Madison, Wisconsin, we have at Madison College a hospitality management associate's degree. So people are, getting serious with event planning. So I think that taught me to have a lot more respect and understanding about, the people who put on events. I know we're always saying, you can take it another step, but I also want to give props to event planners that their jobs are really hard. And I know, even if you're an event planner listening to this podcast right now, you're looking for ways to, bring more excitement and more engagement to your events. So I think that's a great place to start, is learning and growing, but also understanding that the job is difficult. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I took away from the events industry.
That's really interesting. And I'm by no means an event planner. I just hosted social mixers here and there. And that is very interesting that you say that. But I am curious though, because I know so far we've talked about like gamification and helping people network. And one thing that I noticed, especially when I went to events that they had gamification, like Jam Bingo or maybe an icebreaker, it really got people to connect and to learn more about each other.
Hmm.
But when it comes to PC name tag, I'm really curious to know how the name tag is being used as a way to spark that initial conversation. And I know that you've had an opportunity to work with these different organizers and attend these events. So how do you normally see people react to like funky name tags, or maybe they have like a icebreaker built
Ooh.
in? Like how do you find people react to them at these events?
Great question. I see, like I said, I've seen people get so creative with their event badge design. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. And that question makes me think of two specific instances where I was super impressed with what the planners did for the badges for those events. So one time for MPI Wisconsin Spring Education Day, I think it was 2025, we printed these sticky name tags for this casino themed networking event prior to the conference, which was the next day. But they wanted to do something fun with like the casino element because they were having attendees come in and play casino games, which was super fun. So what they did is they worked with PC Name Tag to have each badge have the name of the person, but everyone was a little bit different. So each one had its own separate number and its own separate suit on it. So you could always be like, oh, I'm going to find, other diamonds. I'm going to find other spades. So I liked that people just impromptu had a lot of fun with each badge being different. So I think you can really think about what's the theme of your event, or what's that, that feeling that you want people to get out of it, and kind of tying in the event badge design with it. And then the second one that I think of is we did badges for Amazon VendorCon, which was super cool. They wanted to have some sort of game incorporated with the badges. So we printed bingo on the back. So that was to get people to go to different vendor booths and chat with them. And once you chatted with them, you got a sticker for the back of your badge to put it on your bingo card. And once you got your own bingo, obviously it was kind of up to you to, be honest about your bingo. But you could submit for a entry to a prize gathering. So I thought that was a really fun way to take this, badge that might not have had anything printed on the back and just make it a little bit more fun. And the vendors loved it too because they got more people chatting with them.
Wow, that is really cool. And I imagine as a vendor, like getting people to come up to you and have that conversation is super important. But something that came to mind as you were chatting about that was like, how do you leave memorable impressions on people, and how do you help people to actually connect? And how do you make people enjoy that interaction they had with you? So for me, when I look back, and how do you create a memorable experience during that initial connection, I think back to the friend I made when I introduced myself as Bill Gates. Obviously, I don't go around introducing myself as Bill Gates every time. But one thing I do to connect and leave a memorable impression is asking people questions that they otherwise would not have been asked on a typical everyday type event. So I always like to ask questions that's like, oh, like I've never been asked that question before. And I have a whole list, and I go through them when I meet new people that I'm like, okay, this would be a good connection.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about you, like when you go out to events, when you meet people, what are some things that you do to leave that lasting
That's
impression?
a great question. I come from a marketing background, so I always think of like storytelling and emotion. And I think that's what people remember about your message. So it's like, if you can lean into like telling a story, taking that conversation a step above just, talking about something, it's something that people can remember. Like, how did they feel when they were talking to you, or what was, a story that you told that can really stick in their minds. So I try to lean into storytelling when I'm at events so that people can, identify with a different level of detail and information when they chat with me. But this is also just a quick tip for people. If you download the LinkedIn app, you can actually use a QR code on there. So you open the LinkedIn app, you go to the search bar, and then there's a QR code icon. That's a super easy way to connect with people. So instead of being like, hey, can you type in your name in my LinkedIn and that I can connect with you, you can just show this QR code. So if you're not familiar with that, I would definitely recommend using that for a quick, easy way to connect with people.
And if I can add on to that, something that's also really cool, especially as like a hack or like a tip that I also do too as well, is when I meet new people, I always like to ask questions first and listen, because I find that people, when they feel like they're listened to and then when they feel like they're understood and heard, like they connect with you a bit more. So what I like to do is when I go out to different events, something that helps me feel more confident and more outgoing at these events is asking questions and just sitting back and listening. And something that one of my buddies told me, actually, he said, don't ask too many questions, otherwise they feel like you're interrogating them. But if you ask enough questions, that shows that you have an interest in what they do and who they are. It helps with that initial connection, and you find like the conversation flows a bit smoother than trying to feel like you always have to pitch or always have to talk about yourself first.
Definitely. I love that. I think this would be a great way to end our episode here. So if you had to give one tip for introverts of how to feel more confident at networking events, what would be the one thing that you would share?
One of my top tips, especially for networking, is to ask questions. Ask questions to people that show an interest in them. I know that I used to have a habit of always asking deep questions, especially for meeting people for the first time. And I had a friend one time tell me that maybe I shouldn't ask too many questions because it may feel like an interrogation, but asking enough questions that show an interest in someone, perhaps maybe ask them, hey, like, what is something you wish you knew when you first started out in your industry? Or perhaps it could be, hey, what does success mean to you? Or who are you looking to connect with? The more questions we ask, it shows people that we have an interest. And when people feel like we have an interest with them, it helps them open up more. And that's where the connection really starts to formulate. So that's one tip that's helped me, and I hope it also helps others as well.
I love that. I think we also really need to be cognizant. It's like, are you asking those open-ended questions? Because when you ask yes or no questions, it can kind of halt the conversation. So I actually have some cheat questions that I ask. So here are some phrases to keep the conversation going that I wanted to share with you all. So let's say someone's telling you a story. You can say, tell me more about that. What was that like? How did you get into that? And what were some highlights? So if you're ever feeling like you're stuck and you're not sure how to keep the conversation going, I always, use phrases like that. Or you can always listen to keywords that they're saying, like, hey, I went on a vacation. Tell me more about that. How was that vacation for you? So I love the idea of, finding those ways to keep the conversation going. So thank you so much, Melvin. I had such a great time chatting with you today. And I would definitely recommend checking out Melvin's LinkedIn. He does great content on social. It always makes me laugh. So make sure you connect with him on LinkedIn. Check out JamSocial and Jam Bingo. It looks like so much fun. And then also, if you are interested, PC Name Tag has a networking conversation starters cheat sheet that I can share with you all. So just email eventconnection@pcnametag.com and I can send that to you. So thanks so much, Melvin. I had a great chat with you today.
Thank you, Meaghan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.